Thank you, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Wednesday, April 5th, regularly scheduled meeting of the Advisory Technical Committee of the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. It is, according to my time, if I can get it right, it's 10:10, so we'll go ahead and get the meeting started. Can we get a roll call, please?
Can everyone hear me okay online?
Now I can.
Starting with for the Bolinas Fire District, Steve Marcotte.
Steve Marcotte's here.
And for the City of Mill Valley, Tom Welsh. Here. For City of San Rafael, Quinn Garner. For Marin County Fire, Jordan Reeser.
Jordan's here.
For the Inverness Public Utilities District, Jim Fox.
Tim Fox here.
For the Kentfield Fire, Larry Passero.
Here.
For Marinwood Community Services District, Luke Fretwell. Okay. For Muir Beach, David Taylor.
Here.
For the Novato Fire District, Lynn Osgood. Here. And then Lynn is in the room, but looks like you're muted for that one. Oh, here. For the Sleepy Hollow Fire District, John Hanley.
Here.
For Southern Marin Fire, Fred Hilliard.
Here.
For Stinson Beach, Daniel Blair.
Here.
For the town of Corte Madera, Todd Lando.
Present.
Perfect. For the town of Fairfax, Lauren Umbertis.
Here.
For the town of Ross, Rob Bastianon.
Present.
For the town of San Anselmo, Sean Condry.
Here.
And chair for the city of Larkspur, Chair Martin.
Here.
And then for our at-large members, we have Jim Shaka for Marin County Parks. And it looks like he is unable to attend today. Looks like for state parks, do we have Cindy Schaefer?
Here.
We do. For ecologically sound practices, Belle Cole. It looks like we do have Belle joining us online. Do we have Sean Horn for Marin Water?
Yeah, here.
Yes, we do. Do we have Tori Norville for UCCE? Looks like Tori is not able to attend today. Let's see. What about for PG&E? Is that Greg for PG&E? No, that's not. Greg is for GGNRA. And I see you there, Greg. And do we have Rich for Fire Safe Marin, Rich Shortall?
Here.
Perfect. And so, sir, we do have a quorum. And we can proceed.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Moving item number 3. Do we have any adjustments to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and go to item number 4. This is the time for public expression. The public is welcome to address the Advisory Technical Committee at this time on matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to Government Code Section 54954.2, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take any action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 3 minutes and should be respectful to the community. Do we have any members of the public wishing to address the ATC?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak at the current agenda item, the open time for public expression, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those or anyone who may be joining by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand, *6 to unmute yourself. And sir, we do not have any hands for public comment.
Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and bring it back to the committee. Moving on to item number 5, planning and program managers oral report.
Great, thank you. I am going to share my screen. Great. So hopefully you can see this slide. This will be very brief because we have a lot to cover today. we do have plenty going on that is relevant to this group. First and foremost, we were able to complete the process for putting together a list of qualified contractors to do things like vegetation management. So this is an optional list. You don't have to use this list, but it should provide some streamlining benefit in terms of process and timeline for getting a contractor on board to do work and help implement core MWPA funded projects. We have about 25 contractors on the list currently, and we will plan on keeping that list updated probably every quarter or so, depending on how many additional inquiries we get from folks. We're also in the process of bringing on a GIS contractor. We put out an RFP not too long ago, received 6 inquiries and 6 proposals, and went through the process of meeting with 4 of those 6, and really great entities that we're looking to work with. It's going to be a very tough decision. We haven't made that decision quite yet, but we will very soon. And we'll be taking whatever that contract is to the board in either April, but likely May of this year, so that we can get started building a GIS program to start really organizing all of the spatial data that we are already generating and gathering, and that we could do. So I think there are a lot of really great opportunities that we'll be able to take advantage of once we have a contractor in place. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Ann. Do we have any questions or comments for the committee for Ann on her report? I'd like to go ahead and open it up to the public to see if there's anyone from the public wishing to comment.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, the Planning and Program Manager's report, please raise your hand in the reactions or *9 if you're joining by phone. And sir, there are no hands for comment.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and bring it back to the committee. Moving on to item number 6, which is the consent calendar. This is an opportunity for any members of the public or any members of the committee to pull any items that are on the consent calendar for discussion. Do we have anyone wishing to pull anything from the consent calendar? Any members of the public wishing to pull it?
If there are any members of the public wishing to comment or speak regarding the consent calendar item, please raise your hand in the reactions or *9 if you're joining by phone. And there are no hands, sir.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and bring it back. So at this point, I'd like to go ahead and entertain a motion on approval for the consent calendar. Okay. First is Quinn with Santa Fe, second, John from Sleepy Hollow. May I have a vote, please?
Okay, and that was a motion by Quinn Gardner of City of Santa Fe, and it looks like, was that John?
Yes.
Okey-dokey.
John Hanley from Sleepy Hollow.
John Hanley from Sleepy Hollow. Starting with Steve Marcotte from Bolinas Fire District.
Aye.
And Tom Welsh for City of Mill Valley. City of Santa Fe, Quinn Gardner.
Aye.
Marin County Fire, Jordan Reeser.
Yes.
Inverness, Jim Fox.
Aye.
For Kentfield, Larry Passero.
Aye.
For Marinwood, Luke Retwell. And looks like he has not joined us yet. He will not be here. For Muir Beach, David Taylor.
Aye.
For the Novato Fire District, Lynn Osgood.
Aye.
For Sleepy Hollow Fire, John Hanley.
Aye.
For Southern Marin Fire, Fred Hilliard.
Aye.
For Stinson Beach, Daniel Blair.
Aye.
For the town of Corte Madera, Todd Lando.
Aye.
For the town of Fairfax, Lauren Umbertus.
Yes.
For the town of Ross, Rob Bastianon.
Aye.
For the town of San Anselmo, Sean Condry.
Yes.
And for the city of Larkspur, Chair Martin.
Aye.
Looks like we pass with unanimous votes. They're all in attendance.
Thank you. Motion passes. We'll go ahead and move on to item number 7, discussion items, which is 7A, the fiscal year 23-24 work plan and draft proposals. Do we have a report?
We do. This is going to be a team effort today. Last time we met, we discussed JPA-wide proposals. This time, we're going to really focus on the proposals that are specific to the different zones and the different agencies. The structure of this part of the agenda will include just a brief overview of what the process is, the timeline is. You've seen that information before. I'll give you a brief update on where we seem to be landing on JPA-wide proposals. I'll start going through the zone proposals and invite the ATC ad hoc to provide an update from their perspective on what was discussed or what has been discussed so far. And then we'll also talk about that kind of 20% priority funding that we've discussed previously, but we'll dive into that a little bit today. And then next steps after today, this is the last meeting of the ATC for this season. So we're already here. What we need to do today is think through the proposals that have been submitted. They're all still draft. The numbers are still draft. This document does not need to be finalized today. We don't need to decide on final numbers today, but we do need to decide if we're ready to go ahead and invite the operations committee to finalize the document and the budget. And we can continue coordinating with them, especially through the ad hoc subcommittee that can continue to meet and provide input and answer questions about proposals or other coordination issues. And then the operations committee will meet 2 more times. So this is the overall the tasks and milestones. We started meeting way back in 2022. We started making some tweaks to the portal, which continue to this day, as you're all aware. We have been spending the last couple of months, really February and March, diving into proposing projects and programs into the portal. We made an effort to get the JPA-wide proposals submitted early on so that we could start building that core budget. It's a bit of a Herculean effort. There's a lot of coordination. So, that number has evolved over time and will probably continue to evolve as the operations committee kind of dives into the budget. We've seen draft proposals from all of the member agencies. And so a big thank you to everyone who's been diving in and thinking through how to propose projects and programs and thinking through dollars and project descriptions. So big thank you to everybody. It's a big lift, and I know it's a lot on your plate. We're now into April, which means the operations ad hoc subcommittee will really start diving into all of these proposals. They've met once to discuss JPA-wide proposals and provide input there, and they'll be meeting again to discuss the zone-specific proposals. The ops committee as a whole will meet next week, May 3rd, next week, April, need to do some math here, I think 12th, and then again, May 3rd. So 2 more meetings for the operations committee before this whole draft work plan and budget goes to the board. And that board date is May 18th. So there's still a lot of opportunity for back and forth and coordination. This is a slide you saw previously, just generally overall budget, projected revenue, assuming a 3% increase. That's with the assumption that the board supports that due to the CPI, which was well above 3%. And so these are kind of large numbers for each of these kind of funding buckets for the MWPA. This is a condensed version of the spreadsheet that you've all seen before. Mark distributed a larger version of this mid-March-ish, and this includes kind of just the bare bones of the DSpace and the local funding, those 20% for each of the agencies, and then the core kind of target funding for each of the zones. And so as we discussed before, in the JPA language, we target spending 80% of the revenue generated in any particular zone within that zone. So, and that's averaged over 5 years. So that does provide some flexibility with that other 20% to think through where it's needed. And so we'll be discussing that later on today. The number at the bottom here is what that 20% ends up being, somewhere around 1.3 million. So looking at the JPA-wide proposals, you've seen presentations on nearly everything in this spreadsheet. What I'm going to do is take a moment and walk you through kind of where things seem to be landing after conversations with the ATC, with the ATC ad hoc subcommittee, and with the operations committee and that ad hoc subcommittee. Still looking at the Zone Havens subscription, the wildfire risk perception survey, the next step in that process. That's the public outreach, kind of understanding our populations and how to fine tune public education to reach more audiences and to be more effective. The environmental compliance and implementation support, that includes some environmental compliance for new projects, not a lot of new projects. So a lot of that goes into continued support for implementation of projects in the field. That also includes, oh, I'm noticing I may have something duplicated here. This also includes a few other items that, that you heard about last time I presented. Wildfire education services and resources, Fire Safe Marin, that's public education. The on-parcel and fuel break risk assessment, that's a little different in this table than what you heard previously. One of the things that Willow Labs discussed previously was taking all of that fantastic data that we're generating through all of the defensible space inspections, through Fireside, et cetera, and looking at risk reduction benefit and quantifying it and tracking that over time. One of the things that our board has been asking for and that we've been wanting to pursue is doing that same kind of science and modeling for our shaded fuel breaks and other projects. So this scope expands that effort into other projects such as shaded fuel breaks adjacent to communities. They've also already looked at the Greater Ross Valley shaded fuel break and have looked into kind of the benefit, trying to quantify the benefit from that project, which appears to be pretty substantial actually in terms of fire risk. So taking all of that and that methodology and looking at our projects and really seeing if we can quantify that and then convey that to the public. This also includes a line item for peer-to-peer ambassadors that San Rafael Fire proposed and would be conducted in coordination with Fire Safe Marin and that kind of existing network and resources. Some operational costs, the wildfire preparedness coordinator position, this number is a little bit lower than you saw previously because I think County Fire would pick up more of the budget there. The Chipper Day program, and also a line item for GIS services to help get a system underway that would benefit all of our projects and all of the member agencies. This also includes a grants program with a slightly reduced number than what you saw before, 2 VMS positions, and then also defensible space, the Fireside subscription. So this is similar to what you saw before. It's slightly evolved based on conversations with all of these committees. One thing that's not there is the added few months of funding for the UCCE Marin Master Gardener's position. Discussing that with the operations committee ad hoc subcommittee, they felt that they weren't sure if that position was, I don't know, they had questions about how effective that position was using Measure C dollars or how essential Measure C was for funding that position. So they can articulate that further in their upcoming meeting next week. But they felt that they wanted to take that item out of the JPA-wide proposals. So again, the ATC ad hoc subcommittee met twice to discuss JPA-wide proposals, also met once to discuss, kind of get a preview of the zone-specific proposals. So I'm going to ask Todd to give just a brief kind of report out from that group. And anybody else from the ad hoc subcommittee, feel free to add your thoughts.
Thanks, Ann. This was a group that was created in one of the last ATC committee meetings of 2022. We decided to meet as an ad hoc subcommittee. We nominated Fred Hilliard, Lynn Osgood, Quinn Gardner, Todd Lando, and Lauren Umbertus to participate in this committee. We met twice, March 7th, March 13th. We had an opportunity to have frank discussions, a lot of in-depth discussions and back and forth that we can't necessarily have in an agendized scheduled meeting like this. Reviewing a variety of topics. Thank you, Ann, for just recounting some of these, but we discussed the role of public education in MWPA programs, how public education crosses a lot of boundaries and projects, and there are a variety of different sources that we're using to participate in the public education discussion and how we can better coordinate those among different programs, such as Fire Safe Marin individual agency projects. We looked at the budgets that had been proposed. We discussed how those impact some of the positions that we're looking at funding, new positions and existing positions, and had some opportunities to think about sort of the philosophy that we want to bring back to this committee and how that might impact different new positions, particularly the disaster coordinator position and some of the ranger positions that are proposed or already being funded. We discussed the grant program, opportunities to modify that, some of the changes that have already been proposed within that program, how that impacts the organization and the distribution of those grants, and really spent quite a bit of time discussing how we better target those who have access and functional needs, financial needs to access those grants, so that we target the right people with the grant funding to get the most beneficial wildfire mitigation impacts out of that program, and not just be a source of additional funding for any resident. We looked at the JPA wide budget, discussed back and forth the concept of the 80% from the core proposals. A lot of discussion, and it really helped, I think, our subcommittee members understand how that budget change is going to affect projects going forward. And then we looked at just any opportunity to improve efficiency across the JPA, sharing resources between zones and programs, and discussions about overall continuing to guide the JPA as a whole towards a more efficient process in general.
Thanks so much, Todd. Anybody else from the ad hoc subcommittee like to add anything to that? Okay. Well, then let's talk a little bit more about the draft zone specific proposals. One thing to point out that we really saw this year was, as you might expect, first couple of years of Measure C funding, you see a lot of new projects, new polygons on the map. Now we're seeing kind of a shift towards ongoing implementation and maintenance of some of those existing projects. So that's about as we expected, and that's really what we saw. There are still new projects proposed and new programs proposed, new ideas. And I think as we seek out additional funding, we'll see more new projects as well. But for now, there's really an emphasis on really digging into what we already have drawn on maps and in terms of vegetation management, and implementing and continuing to maintain those projects. So that is an interesting note to make. And then for today, what I'd like to do is really highlight just at the very high level what types of activities are proposed in each of the zones. Because there's so much that is carrying over from previous fiscal years last year, I think we can really streamline the discussion today. I don't think we need to dig into most of the proposals that are a carryover from fiscal year 22-23. So I've indicated generally in most of these tables what's new and what is a continuation of a previously approved project, just to note that. I'm going to ask Todd to go first here to talk about Central Marin Zone projects and programs, and it does look like there may be something missing from this table here, but that's probably true for several of the tables. We'll see how we do. But in this table, in Central Marin, there are really a couple of different types of projects that really carry over into, there's a lot of consistency across the different jurisdictions. So I've kind of reorganized it, Todd. Hopefully it's clear enough for you guys to get an idea for what's going on. You mind taking it, Todd?
Yeah, I think we recognized early on, probably before the MWPA was even launched, the complexity of managing the central zone because of the number of agencies that are involved. You know, the taxing authorities from the town of Fairfax, San Anselmo, Ross, Larkspur, Corte Madera, Kentfield Fire District, and Sleepy Hollow Fire District, all contributing and all working, together as a single zone in most ways. So what we've done, we've pulled representatives from all of these agencies together. We've made an agreement and concept that we submit similar proposals to simplify management of the projects to ensure that we can cross agency boundaries fluidly and really, I think, run the most efficient program possible for all of these different agencies. It's worked totally fluidly, I think, at this point. Great cooperation among agencies. So we submitted 3 very simple proposals. These are continuations of existing projects that we've been working on since the inception of the JPA, primarily an invasive vegetation treatment program, a defensible space voluntary abatement program, and then our defensible space evaluation and inspection program. And what we realized early on was that all of the different types of projects that we're interested in implementing in these agencies fall into those categories. We were able to write streamlined project concepts. We were able to go through the environmental review process for each of these projects and keep the program simple. We have work that's related to evacuation routes, but oftentimes, in fact, most often it's really invasive vegetation that's creating problems along our roadways. So we've developed a program that allows us to address problems like that fluidly, easily, and cross different wildfire boundaries and cross different zones, whether it's a roadway access zone or a defensible space zone, very fluidly. All the programs fall into those categories, and we're approaching the point where you may see a change next year as we really move into more of a maintenance phase for some of these programs. But we did write these proposals of some maintenance of existing work, continuation project. So hope that makes some sense. Our core proposals this year, this is where there's one that's missing, but we're going to continue. We've scaled significantly back because on the evacuation route core project, we've scaled back quite a bit, about cutting the budget by about 2/3 for the evacuation route core project. And that's because we've completed most of the roadway miles with an initial pass that we wanted to with our that core project. That was also supplemented by some CAL FIRE funding just before MWPA started. So that's been a multi-million-dollar, multi-year project to clear access and egress routes for residents and the fire service. Our Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break is the biggest piece of this whole project. That's underway. We're starting year 2 right now. So $950,000 supplemented by CAL FIRE funding as well. And the piece that's missing from here is that we do still intend to move some core funds into our defensible space evaluation program. That's our flagship program. We feel that we're getting the most value for our investment out of that program. And we're going to supplement more than just the basic 20% that's allocated from the MWPA JPA towards defensible space, with an additional $300,000 just in the central zone.
Thanks so much, Todd. I'll make sure that 300,000 gets added to the spreadsheet here. Now moving on to West Marin. We have several folks from West Marin who can help describe what we're doing. I'm wondering, Steve, do you mind talking a little bit about Bolinas? Steve has his hand raised. Is he able to unmute? Okay.
Steve, you should be
Hi.
able to deliver your comments, sir.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, just fine. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. For our projects this year, we're continuing to contract with the the MWPA inspectors to do our home hardening and evaluations. And then the other project we're doing is along the lines of the compliancy that MWPA is working on with the Coastal Commission. So we're allocating the rest of our funds to be in line with that, knowing that we won't be able to do any work this year. It's all going to be compliant. So it's kind of a placeholder for next year when hopefully we have everything worked out with the Coastal Commission. We'll have a good amount of funding ready to actually do some of the vegetation management, doing the shaded fuel breaks and going along the perimeter of our district to create some type of fuel breaks for any type of fire that might come into our district. So that's what we have this year.
Great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Jim, if you're able to speak, do you want to talk at all about the Inverness proposals, local and D-Space?
Okay, sure. We're just doing similar to Bolinas. We're going to use MWPA inspectors as we did last year. We're going to roll over some of the money and use the money from this coming year to try and get a chipper, which the cost of which, well, our original estimate was basically just based on what we were going to have left over. So the chipper is going to eat up that and more. And then we'll just continue with the evacuation route clearing that we usually do on our watershed roads. The link that goes from one of our areas to another through our watershed.
Great. Thanks so much, Jim.
Sure.
And Stinson Beach, Jesse or anyone else, are you available to speak to Stinson Beach?
Yeah, this is Daniel Blair.
Oh, great.
Hi. So yeah, just similar to everybody else in the West, we're contributing to the coastal zone compliance as well as D-Space, and we're spending some money on the upkeep of the fuel break that we were able to complete this year. Yeah, nothing too out of the ordinary.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Now I'm wondering if Jordan is available to speak to this slide, Marin County Fire, local and D-Space proposals.
Sure. It's all kind of, I mean, it's laid out there. We're just, we have not been focusing much of our effort in the San Geronimo Valley, which is kind of the largest of the West Marin tax base, because we've been fortunate enough to have some CAL FIRE grants to do work on non-county maintained roads. So we need to shift some of our funds, and hopefully that'll be a large portion of the core into the future as well, back into those communities that are the paying into the tax here. So we have just continued and improved upon roadside clearance and expanding out on some private property. We have a few larger properties that are on the perimeter of San Geronimo, the Valley, and Woodacre that we're going to do some understory thinning, and hopefully in preparation for some prescribed fire in relation to some of our other grants. So we're going to, and then also transitioning out and starting to focus on some of the Nicasio area, that, the ridge between Lucas Valley Road and the San Geronimo Valley up and over the ridge is a pretty critical one from a fire operations perspective. The fire roads are on private property majority, and they're not in good shape, and nor is the vegetation along. So kind of that transitional potential for fire across the county, that's a pretty critical one that's played historic roles as well. So we're going to start to look at that Santa Margarita area pretty extensively, and probably start to put a lot more effort into that, just to try to keep fire on either side of that ridge coming into or going out of the San Geronimo Valley, and then into the coast, and obviously over to Novato and that way too. And then our just usual D-Space program. It's not housed here at the golf course anymore with the collaboration, consortium. I forget the name they gave it now. The Galactic Alliance, I think, something like that. So they're not out of the golf course anymore. We will have our crews out of the golf course now. We have additional two crews this year. So we're going to be engaging in a lot of the vegetation management work on our own, not part of the MWPA, just because we'll have 4 crews, fully staffed crews this year, working with the Park Service, working with open space and numerous others. So yeah, and then we have, I think, 4 or 5 CAL FIRE grants and a couple more in the works that we're going to keep proposing and doing work with.
Great, thanks so much, Jordan. I'm going to ask you to speak to some of these as well. I'll just pipe in here and talk about the 4th item on the list, and then Jordan, I'm hoping you can talk about the other 3. You know, for really anything to take place in terms of vegetation management in the coastal zone for, and this affects several of our member agencies, Stinson Beach, Bolinas, Inverness, Muir Beach in the southern zone as well. Coastal Act compliance is required. And so we do have 1 permit in place through the County of Marin through their local coastal program for evacuation route work in very defined areas. But we're also working with the state to achieve a public works plan. And this public works plan is a streamlining tool to help you get Coastal Act compliance for subsequent projects. So we're working on that. That's also going to require CEQA compliance as a totally separate line item. So this budget item, number 4 on the list here, is for CEQA compliance and potentially some sort of permit application through the state for some portion of a theoretical vegetation management project or a suite of projects. So this item would include working with all of these member agencies in the coastal zone to think through what we would like to have covered under CEQA and Coastal Act permits. So what's the wish list? What does that look like? And really kind of drawing lines on a map and then going through the process along with our consultants to get environmental compliance in place so that next year we can start implementing projects in the coastal zone. So that's what this item is about. And the reason why that's highlighted a different color is because that is an item that I'm wondering if the ATC could discuss today in terms of that 20% priority funding. Because as you know, the West Zone doesn't generate a ton of funding, but the regulatory burden is great in the West Zone and overlapping the Southern Zone as well. Jordan, do you mind picking up the other 3?
Yeah, sure. So the first one there is just we're working with Greg Jones and the National Park Service, highlighting and targeting some identified work around Bolinas and Stinson that are part of their fire management plan, so covered under the NEPA process. And so part of that will be potentially for contractor support. We're going to utilize the TAM crews as well, but also to have some money in there just if the Park Service has surveys or requirements through their NEPA and internal process, if we need to go out and do any type of, plant surveys or bird surveys or whatever in attached to that. So to help take some of the burden off of them, if we can have contractors that can help do that. And then the second one there is just our continuation of evacuation route clearance as part of the first phase or the county approved portion of the coastal zone roads. $200,000 doesn't go far with contractors and there's a lot of roads. So we actually are continuing to engage on that. So that's just kind of continuation of those roads that were outlined, and we'll focus on Stinson or Bolinas, a few little bit in Stinson, and then transitioning over to some of the iPod stuff and continuing to do work up on the Drake Street Drive area. And then the third one there is we just received a CAL FIRE grant for a new piece of equipment, a forestry skid steer, and as part of that we're hoping to get the proper masticator head. The machines are really expensive, so the grant we got is going to cover the purchase of the machines, and then we'd like to get a good masticator head that will help us not only in the West but also kind of countywide to be able to put this new piece of machinery to work with our existing ones like we've been doing with San Rafael on the Gold Hill Fire Road and other stuff. So that's the three that are in there in addition to what you mentioned about the fourth one.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Moving on to another zone, Novato. I'd like to bring Mike Swayze over as a panelist so he can help discuss the items that are included in this year's suite of proposals for the Novato zone. Okay, Mike's joining us shortly. Great. Mike, are you able to unmute yourself?
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Ann, for bringing me over to the good side. So, we've got the simplest application here in MWPA because the Novato zone is simply one agency. Our service area covers the city of Novato and the unincorporated areas. So we have less complexity that way. You'll see that almost all of our local dollars are directed to our grant program for vegetation management and home hardening. And then we also have, similar to other folks, we have a voluntary hazard abatement pot that has been really successful at helping people who have, hardship cases. We also spend our defensible space dollars on our team of wildfire mitigation specialists who do the home assessments and get people tuned up for our grant program. And this is a new program this year is the Novato Fire Mitigation Ranger, modeled somewhat after San Rafael. We've developed an MOU with Novato PD to fund a full-time and a half-time position dedicated to patrolling the interface lands, particularly looking at monitoring hazardous encampments and campsites. And they're going to take immediate action for illegal fires and ignition sources, working closely with Novato response team and other community stakeholders, assisting City of Novato Homeless Outreach Coordinator to assist unhoused folks. So that's our local and D-space funding proposals.
And Mike, I've switched the slides over to the core proposals.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. So the big news is the Greater Novato Shaded Fuel Break, which should be coming to the board this month. Is that correct? We're in April. Yeah.
Yeah. Correct.
And so we'll be ready to begin work that in the new fiscal year. Most of the work will start after the end of bird nesting season in August. We've applied for a CAL FIRE grant to supplement that work and kind of boost our level. That project covers about 3,000 acres, similar to the Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break, a bit larger, about 65 miles of fuel break. So we're identified the priority areas for this year and are developing right of entry agreements for those private properties and public properties that we're planning to do work on. We have we'll be completing a demonstration garden at Station 63 this spring, and we want to do a similar project at our admin office here. You see a number of continuation of work that we've been doing on City of Novato open space lands, fire road maintenance. It's, I guess you could call it a new project. This year we had a similarly named project, but we're essentially doing the inventory of all the unpaved wildland roads. So this coming fiscal year, we'll be looking at project work that came out of that inventory. We have a chipper program, didn't list it last year because it was carried forward from the year before, but we're listing all projects. LRAD, we're doing a study this year, doing more implementation next year. evacuation routes and more work on open space lands. I'm trying to kind of give you the abbreviated presentation here. What's missing here is we're proposing 3 positions. And this list doesn't include a new vegetation management specialist position, sort of the entry level one. So I'll get with you, Ann, to make sure that gets included.
Sounds
So
good.
I think that's all I've got for you now.
Okay, great. Thank you. And, just for everyone listening, all of these spreadsheets are draft and they'll continue to evolve as we work with the operations committee and the ATC ad hoc subcommittee and double check that everything's in the web portal that needs to be there. So these spreadsheets will not be the final spreadsheets. Thanks so much, Mike. Really appreciate it. Quinn, do you mind taking on some San Rafael projects? This first slide is local and D-Space, and then next one is core.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So we did put some money into our local for restoration in some of our project sites to reintroduce native vegetation that's more fire adapted, which also, of course, helps with erosion issues and things like that. A lot of these are continuations, including our rangers, parking boxes, various staffing. We do use the small and responsive projects to handle complaints in small areas of open space that we have all the correct CEQA documentation, et cetera, in place for. And then we are going to look at doing some specific evacuation drills this year. We're finishing up our educational landscaping garden at our B Street San Rafael Community Center. And then we're looking at a secondary location that we're hoping to plan for in the coming year. And then we've got some specific dollars there for outreach and education engagement to help support, staffing at events like Ember Stomp and other things like that. And then we are, as part of our overall emergency operations plan update for the city, which is a different non-MWPA project, but we're developing hazard specific playbooks. So we're looking at doing one specific to wildfire in the coming year. To really look at our response, which will also, I think, help tie into our evacuation plans and things like that. And then, of course, our D-Space program, which is largely staff. And then, of course, things like vehicles, tech, all those kind of things. And then our core, for the most part, like you mentioned, our continuing projects, shaded fuel breaks, evacuation routes, staffing. Our direct assistance or the community assistance projects include both grants and direct assistance, or I think some folks call it voluntary abatement type projects, where we can go and do the work to help residents create their defensible space. Our goat grazing is expanding, which is what we expected as we move into maintenance of projects where we've cleared other debris. And then, of course, more work on our fire roads continues to make sure those are not only accessible as fire roads and safe for responder use, but also that they can serve as breaks. And the thing I want to point out here is we have zeroed out Ridgewood to request that as a priority project. So everything else actually should zero out, and we can figure out where that extra 11, I probably just did my math wrong somewhere. But the Ridgewood Shaded Fuel Break is a big project with joint landowners, really addressing a big eucalyptus concern. Actually was included in part of the evacuation studies in terms of how that impact would spread. So we think it's a really important project that not only benefits our zone, and we'll be asking for priority funding to start working on that.
Great. Thanks so much, Gwen. One last slide for the San Rafael zone is Marinwood. These are a continuation of 2 proposals included in the fiscal year 22-23 work plan, and Marinwood wasn't able to attend today, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to reach out. For Southern Marin, Fred, do you mind talking to these items, and anyone else in the room is welcome to chime in. We're going through Mill Valley, local and D-Space, Muir Beach. So David, if you want to talk about this latter item on the slide, and then the following slide will be Southern Marin, local and D-Space, and then we'll get into core. So Mill Valley items first.
Sure, happy to talk to you guys about that. As a lot of you know, Mill Valley Fire is annexing into the Southern Marin Fire District. That'll actually be official on July 1st. So since the shared services, I've assumed the position of the fire marshal for both agencies and also oversee the defensible space and vegetation management programs. So a lot of these programs, as you see, are continuations of previous years with the Mill Valley hazardous tree removal, and we're actually renaming that because the title doesn't actually do justice as to what the description is. So that's going to be a forest restoration. So that title will be changed, but it's a continuation. And then we're joining the county defensible space inspection evaluation program. And so Mill Valley is going to join in that as well. And then the defensible space inspector is an ongoing position.
Thank you so much. David Taylor, do you mind speaking a little bit to Muir Beach?
Right, sure. So these are rolling over from last year, the same categories of work. We plan to just implement some tree trimming and the D-space inspections I think we do with the county already, and so that's how that works. So those are our local D-space dollars.
Great, thank you so much. Southern Marin local and D-space proposals, Fred?
Okay, so the project Forest Health Restoration is a rollover from the previous year. We've also looked at the remaining rollover monies since the inception of MWPA. And as you'll see in the next particular position, we're using the rollover money from the 22-23 to fund this position. So it shows as a project, however, it's being funded with rollover money. Sausalito Forest Health Restoration is also a rollover from last year. With the combining of the two jurisdictions and the scope of the work that we're doing right now, it's exceeded the capacity of myself being able to oversee that. So we're going to fund or partially fund through the MWPA, a deputy fire marshal, to oversee all defensible space and vegetation management projects. It is not 100% funding. It is a partial funded position. The D-space inspector full-time is a rollover from last year. And then again, Southern Marin Fire is also obviously joining the defensible space inspection evaluation program. And then our Southern Marin Emergency Notification Network is going to use rollover money to fund the last two sites for those towers, which were also a rollover continuation from last year. So for Mill Valley, the Mill Valley Shaded Fuel Break is an ongoing project, again, continuation from last year, and the same with the Tamalpais Homestead Valley Fuel Break. We have the Regional Neighborhood Response Coordinator. That's a shared position with MWPA and Southern Marin Fire. That particular position is also taking on a public education responsibility. Let's see, the Summit Ralston, again, continuation. And then I'll skip over the Muir Beach. So Dr. Taylor could talk about that, but Ring Mountain Fuel Break is also a continuation as well.
Thanks, Fred. The Muir Beach, we're going to continue on the evacuation corridor, Banducci Ranch, to work some more on that project with NPS as time and funds permit. And then we are going to, we're proposing to join with the other coastal zone core projects on West Marin to work on this, get approval to do the southbound side of the evacuation corridor. So that's what that money is for.
Thanks so much.
I think there's two more projects which were for Marin County Fire.
Oh, you're right. Yes.
Yeah, so
Yeah, the
Jordan, do you want to add to that?
Sure. Just real quick, the Marin City one is just that continuation. And you know, the compliance is complete for that and that. And I don't know when we talk about the process for looking at that additional 20% prioritization, that might be a good candidate for that just because it's shovel ready. And we're also potentially then we'd like to just get it done one way or the other. So we also are not opposed to putting in for a CAL FIRE grant on our end just to complete that project in the future. And then the community emergency warning signs, that was the Board of Supervisors. Of all the Board of Supervisors, they have a push or for community outreach and whatnot. So they want to put some digital signage up at existing fire stations and other public facilities. So still more to come on that, but that was a really directive down from the Board of Supervisors. We're doing it in West Marin as well with a TOT money, not using the MWPA money, but utilizing some of the occupancy tax stuff. So we'll see how that one plays out. We'd have capacity to, hopefully it won't be that price point is a little estimate high, and maybe have some available funds to redistribute to getting some actual work done.
Great, thanks. So I wanted to point out that the ATC ad hoc did take a moment and kind of preview at a high level what the proposals were as of March 27th. And we'll be continuing as long as the ATC ad hoc subcommittee agrees and would like to do so to meet and discuss and coordinate with the operations committee. So the other thing that the ad hoc subcommittee discussed was kind of an overall methodology and an approach to how do we have this conversation about this additional 20%. What do we do with that as a group? And what are some of the factors that might be part of that conversation to help inform that decision? So as you've heard, we have at least 2, maybe 3 or more proposals that are interested in receiving some of that 20% funding. That includes the Ridgewood project in San Rafael, environmental compliance and scoping for vegetation management in the coastal zone, including some West Marin and Muir Beach, and potentially some work in Marin City, it looks like. And there may be other things that you have in mind that would be good candidates. I think what I'd like to do at the moment is look at the language that we reviewed as an ad hoc subcommittee and get your feedback on that. So the idea here for the extra, or not extra, but the 20% priority funding would be to support priority projects that the ATC feels are a priority. And it may be that they're kind of new and emerging projects, or they could be continued implementation and maintenance of high priority important projects, particularly costly projects. We can, some of the things that might be good to consider while kind of choosing where to put this funding would be how it fits into MWPA goals, how it fits into kind of that wish list from the county CWPP, where it falls in terms of fire risk. According to your own expertise, we have a lot of experts in the room. And additionally, kind of where funding is being spent or isn't being spent around different zones around the JPA. And then also taking a look at results from some of the studies that MWPA and our partners are taking on. So, you know, in the future, the evacuation route study, some of the work around surveying and understanding better how to approach public education, the on-parcel risk assessment, say, some of the data there. So that might be informative in the future. At the moment, a lot of those tools and studies are really kind of in draft form and are not complete yet. But we, again, have a lot of great experts in the room and a lot of understanding about where the need is, et cetera. One other factor I would include in this list is kind of where the costs are high and the revenue is low. And so, of course, I'm referring to some of the work in the coastal zone that's very costly to get going. So those are some of the factors that we talked about in the ad hoc subcommittee. And I think today what we can do is discuss the criteria, discuss any particular ideas, both in terms of kind of in generalities or very specifically what projects you think would be good candidates to receive additional funding for that 20%. And as a reminder, that's about 1.3 million right now. We can discuss the ad hoc subcommittee continuing to meet and coordinate with the operations committee. All of these, spreadsheets are draft, the numbers are draft. They will change over time and as we continue to coordinate with the operations committee. The ops committee will be meeting on the 12th of this month and then again, so 2 more times, again on May 3rd, and then the board will be considering the work plan and budget on May 18th. So with that, that's a lot of information, but I'd like to open it up to discussions and any public comment, etc. And thanks to everyone who helped present the proposals today.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, it's definitely a lot to unpack here. Should we start with reviewing the projects or reviewing the process of the 20% core allocation to the zones?
Yeah, I think it would be really useful to have that conversation about the 20% and any thoughts about generally how that might be useful and how you foresee applying that. And then if there are any specifics, we can discuss those too. But I think the overall approach would be good to discuss as a group.
Then if it's okay with, I'd like to go ahead and start the conversation of the 20% methodology for reallocation of those funds. And just to confirm, that is 20% of the overall within the zone, or is it overall core?
So in the 60% of the overall budget, and the MWPA budget is so simple and streamlined and not complicated at all. The 60% of the budget that goes to core, 10% of that goes away for admin. Then we subtract out the JPA-wide proposals, and then we look at that and we split it into 80 and 20.
Okay. So out of the
So hopefully
JPA-wide proposals is 80, then there's 20% allocated back to the zones.
Yeah, there's 80% reflected in the target core budgets that are included in the spreadsheets currently. And then the additional 20% that was included last year, but is now being held per this conversation.
Okay, so clear as mud.
Yeah,
So I think to simplify it, there's about 1.1 million or so, 1.3 million
yes,
that could get reallocated.
Exactly.
And so here within the group, we can have the discussion to which zone we feel that would be best fit for this year to receive that allocation.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
we'll keep it that.
Any portion of it or all of it. It doesn't have to be all of it.
Okay,
Can I just get, sorry, I just want to make clarification.
yes. So there's about
So-
1.3 million that can get reallocated from core funding to any particular zone for emergency funding for a project that they want to get off the ground that they don't have funding for initially.
Or not.
Or we can split that money up into 2 priority projects, correct?
Or would it be sent back
Or
or not? Or would
Or
it,
not.
or would it just be sent back to those zones?
It could be, I guess that is, in theory, we could as a group decide that we don't want to use priority funding and we just want to keep every zone at 100% of the 60% minus the JPA
20%.
minus the.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's precisely true. You could decide to not use any of that 20% and move it back to the zones as it normally would have been or would have been last year. But it's also an opportunity to collaborate and kind of think together about where the priorities are and where the risk is, where the lack of funding is, et cetera. So
Okay,
think of it as an opportunity.
With that, I'd like to go ahead and open up for any comments, questions, concerns. If people in the room would like to comment, go ahead and raise your hand. Tom?
Thanks, Chief. I do think this is a noble pursuit and in alignment with what the original goals were for MWPA to spread money around to areas that are a threat, because fire anywhere on the landscape is a threat to all of us. So that's a noble pursuit to do. My only concern, and I think it is a factor that should be weighed in, is that any project that is assumed to be out in the coastal area, or for any zone for that matter, should not exceed the agency's or that zone's ability to fund the maintenance. That's my main concern. That should be a confounding or a containing factor that should be included.
When
And do you mind putting the slide back up with the recommendation? And then my other question was going to be, because I think, Chief, I think that's a great factor to consider, was going to be how much is requesting priority funding right now? Like, are we at the 1.1, 1.3, and then we just agree that these projects meet the criteria we set forward, or are we actually in a position where we need to be prioritizing projects? And I guess, does every zone feel like they budgeted understanding the 20% priority funding, or need to go back and rethink things, I guess?
Just for discussion point right here, Ann and I have had a discussion offline about this, but there is a project missing from the central zone that I pointed out, and it should have been in there. It was submitted, and that really was, at least from the central zone standpoint, the request for 20%. So
Okay.
I'm not sure the numbers we're looking at right now are necessarily accurate, but I know we're just discussing kind of the concept here. But it does show that there's going to need to be some adjustments before we make any kind of final decisions or recommendations.
Mhm. Yeah, so that would be a great thing to discuss. And I'll add that into the Central Marin tables. And then I think what might be a good pathway forward is talking kind of in generalities where you would like to potentially see this go, and then assigning the ad hoc subcommittee to discuss it further and really dig into it.
And speaking of generalities, is there any thought for local hiring? For not to confuse ourselves with the potential firefighters that we're developing, but our young people who are in high school or out of college, where they could get a summer job. It's not working. Working now should be green. I could care less. You can hear me. Is there any thought for local? Is there any thought for local hire? And I'll give you a couple specifics. I've been involved in it. I was in Fairfax, and the city and the community liked it when they saw their own children working, wearing, at that time it was Drake High shirts. Now it's different, but the community embraced it, as well as in Larkspur on a hill. When community members saw kids, they went to high school working. And there's a few items we have to, that's not true, is Marin kids will not work. That is not true. I was in Marin City 3 weeks ago with my guys, and then they see the crews coming in, and one of the guys says, "We just got outsourced." And so is there a belief or a hope that we could hire local and the kids will work? And it's probably cheaper than a company, because someone else would run it who is a nonprofit. But I'd like to just keep that concept going, because the taxpayer would like to see his kids working. And in terms of advertising, word of mouth is the best. You can't buy word of mouth. When we did it, the parent would sign the form acknowledging that the funding is coming from this entity. So the parents have bought in, and I could give you hundreds of stories. Here's a good one. We're working with kids, lower middle class, and then a rich kid from Mill Valley came on. They will call you because their father said, "Get to work." So this kid comes, he's dressed completely different. He's got a collared shirt and nice shoes, but he worked, but it was a good entity. So just a thought for us as we progress, can this And many entities in our country now use local funding. You must hire local. So just a thought, and I don't want to take a lot of your time, but the Marin kids could use it, and remove the idea that they won't work. They will work. Thank you.
Ruben, may I say something?
Sure, Sean.
I always love the idea of education and training. I think it's always a great thing to have. And maybe that's something that could be done with some of this funding. But for me, I'm always kind of like really hands-on and like, what can you do actually physically in the world to make real changes? Like vegetation management. And I've loved what I've seen throughout Ross Valley and San Anselmo and open space adjacent to homes. And so for me, in my opinion, the more money we can put towards, whether it's anywhere in Marin, towards hardening of the landscape and make it more resilient in terms of fire spreading. I think if there's a hole somewhere that maybe Todd has identified or someone else, and I think you guys probably know better than I do, where those are. I know things locally to some degree and work with Rob a lot and other people, but that's where I think the money should go. If there's something we can do that is really going to make it much more easy to defend during a fire outbreak.
Absolutely. Anyone else in the room? Discussion, comments? Quinn?
Yeah, I think the numbers are probably pretty close, actually, if I was taking like reasonable notes as we were going through and trying to figure out where the overages were. So I don't think if we think that the projects, I think I saw Novato at like 600 over. I don't know if that's a money or if that's 600 requests for priority funding. San Rafael's is about 500 for Ridgewood. Todd, you're saying about 300. And then there was about 200 for the coastal zone. So we're pretty close. And I think if we think all those projects worthwhile and meet the criteria that can be locally supported, or all fuel reduction, risk reduction projects, that we could just figure out how to everybody cut 5% and get to it, or is it actually just going back? I don't know. Lynn, can you speak to Novato's? Is that 600 overage a request for priority funding, or just is there carryover money from that or anything else?
I believe some of it is carryover, and it is priority. And back to what you said too is, all the projects that we're doing is part of that resiliency and that fire adaptive community. Everything from the home hardening grants, the D-space inspection, as well as the chipper days and shaded fuel breaks. So it's all part of that really fire adaptive communities that we are all working towards. And I think all of us that have gone over our budgets, those are priorities. We're all working towards that adaptive community concept.
Can I ask?
Yeah, sure.
Just maybe think of something, in our D space and core, there's been like new open space that I discovered in the last few years that San Anselmo was responsible for. And it was actually quite large. Mm-hmm. And we actually just put local money, town money towards it. And so one question I might have, and this is not, I'm wondering, do we know where everything is? Because there's a lot of land out there. And I get surprised sometimes about some of the things that are adjacent to homes and people dumping a bunch of debris back there, and the trees and all the underbrush is overgrown. So do we need more manpower or human power to figure out where those areas are? That's something else.
Well, I think each community has done a really good job of mapping their jurisdictions and knowing where those open space areas are, whether it be private property, city open space. For example, Novato has a large majority of city open space, as well as Marin County open space. And then we have pretty large landowners as well. So, take some time, do some mapping, figure out who owns what. And like what we're doing is the Greater Novato Field Break. We have identified all of those, and they're all part of our shaded field break plan. So, but there's always little nooks and crannies, and there, easements as well. So, what jurisdiction are you from?
San Anselmo.
San Anselmo. So
we have a lot of open space.
Yeah, you have a lot of open space, and you probably have quite a few easements and private property that may look like open space.
I'm wondering if,
Or Todd, I think he had a question.
Yeah, I did. Well, I just wanted to reiterate. I think what Gwen said is spot on. We're pretty close. You know, that none of the zones, particularly, you know, that whether it's a over budgeting or a request for priority fundings, is still really not decided. We discussed this a little bit in the ad hoc subcommittee, but we're still wrapping our heads around the whole concept. This is a change for all of us. So I think we're probably at a point where that ad hoc subcommittee, you know, we can separate the tables and wrestle it out on the floor and come back to this group with a recommendation. The reality is, I don't think we need to go to that. I think we're really close right now, and we're certainly all capable of making some moves around, making having some discussion at that table about where the priorities are that cross boundaries and meet the goals of the MWPA. At that point, we come back and there's probably going to be some funding, you know, going from other zones towards a project like maybe Nevada's or the Ridgewood project. You know, but I think it's going to be minimal at best. We're all pretty much working within the boundaries and already working together in the spirit of this group.
Yes, go ahead, Quinn.
I was just gonna say, I agree. My recommendation was gonna be that we maybe just move the small number movement around if we feel like, I think all the overages / priority projects are on the ground fuel reduction work. And as long as there's a commitment to those from those individual agencies to be able to maintain it. And I do just want to comment on the staffing, because I do think it's a really valid point, but I think we're also already doing it. Through our defensible space programming, we're trying to hire local through programs like the Fire Foundry, where we're trying to get people in and give them those opportunities. And then the Fire Foundry is essentially indirectly funded because we're using them to do our work, and that we are trying to provide people with those opportunities up. So I think it's a valid, I'm not sure it's a standalone priority project. I think it's integrated into all the other work we're doing.
The Fire Foundry is somewhat limited. Yeah, how many we have? 12?
Yeah, John, I think with hiring local is, I think if individuals know or have crews with local kids, I think the best method is build that relationship with your local fire agency, because they're the ones who look and seek out projects. So having those relationships ahead of time, saying, hey, you know, we've got a group of 20 high school kids that come on board in August or June and they stay down for 3 months. I think that's a way to integrate them into these projects. Chief Waltz.
I just had one more question as far as the ATC subcommittee looking at and keeping an eye on the 80% return to sender, and that should be a part of it, because that's going to be an accountability piece for the community coming forward. And so it seems to me that maybe loosely planning out 5 years worth of work might be the appropriate step, you know, for you guys to consider, so that you can have that 80% return to sender in alignment. And it needs to be in alignment, what, in 5 years? Okay.
Mark.
Great comment there. And staff has been working with our Citizens Oversight Committee to create that exact table. And so it's still in draft form, but I think it's pretty accurate. And so Ann and I definitely can share that table with the ad hoc to help guide that.
And to help further the conversation, so that at least we're headed in the correct direction, that the vision that the board of directors has. What is their vision when we start looking at the 80 plus the 20% over surplus? What is their vision of how that money is reallocated?
They would like to expend our resources at the right time and to the right place, and not be stuck to this 100% paradigm of return to sender. And obviously adhere to the 80% requirement of the JPA language, but then exert our resources, like I said, right time, right place.
Okay. And so similar to what Sean had mentioned, is if we see a hole somewhere within the county that can benefit from that additional funding, then the ATC ad hoc committee would then review, wrestle it out, do whatever they need, provide direction and or recommendations to this body. Then we would then approve those projects or reallocation of funds, to then we take that recommendation to the operations committee, who then approves the budget.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what we're looking at?
Yep.
Okay.
And then I want to reiterate what Chief Welch brought up, and then the maintenance piece of it. And that was one of the frameworks that we were looking at, is that the 80% is kind of sequestered for the maintenance of ongoing, so that we don't ever get out of that. And then the 20% is for new and emerging projects. And then I do see a transition strategically for the MWPA between years 5 and 7, that we get to almost all of our funding going towards maintenance of the work that we've done. And then we go after grant funding for new and emerging projects.
Okay. For this conversation, I'd like to open it up to anyone in the audience for members of the ATC. Does David have anything, any comments, or anyone from Bolinas or Muir Beach out there?
Hey, this is Jordan. I have a quick just comment, and I think you know, as a whole, you know, the county has a unique reality just with properties and tax bases and people, you know, spread throughout the county. And you know, my biggest concern associated with the 20%, although I agree with it in principle, especially just for thinking about West Marin here, which isn't our only thought, you know, just if, you know, as our funds have been significantly decreased over time from the original, you know, 685 now down to the 315 or whatever our number is for the core, you know, to take 20% off of a really a small pot of money that then we're going to, in essence, use those funds to go support a larger project, you know, our project in one of the other zones that have, you know, significant amounts of funding is just going to be, you know, a hard, it's not going to be a hard sell because we just tell people, but it just seems like, you know, that's tough for us just because we have such a limited fund source as it is, then to be taking additional money out of the zone to then go be spent in another zone. And not saying that other money should come into this zone, the West Zone, to be spent, but that just will be a little difficult, I think, to try to kind of pass our red face test on that.
Any other comments from members of the audience? Seeing none, go ahead and open this up to members of the public to see if they have any comments, questions, or concerns.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, the fiscal year 2023-2024 work plan draft proposals, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand. And sir, there are no public comments.
Okay, I'd like to go ahead and bring it back to the committee. I'd like to go ahead and open it up for anyone here again for any further discussions, comments. I see your hand, Bell.
Yeah, this is before being aware of any of the 20% discussion, but just I had comments on the zone specific. I had some feedback from the ESP colleagues who are commenting to me on the ATC agenda. Okay. And these are quite detailed, but one is for the Novato number 6871. The person said this is very helpful info on desired spacing between shrubs and would like to see that level of detail for more projects. And then another number of 4182, which is increased funding toward defensible space inspections and vegetation work in West Marin. And this person thanked the staff for recognizing this problem and remedying as best as possible. I have others, but those are the two main ones I wanted to say. And also just wanted to mention that we're going to we're looking at a longer term proposal, which I will mention briefly. I'm going to be talking to Ann about it, calling for analysis of MWPA monitoring, data collection, and use of success measures to assess environmental impacts of their vegetation management needs. This is long-term. And then for longer-term research to link with what academics may be doing, looking at the 10-year existence of MWPA, so that fire agency staff and academics will interact in a structural process. And thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bill. So can we split the two topics up, one with the 20% conversation, and the rest we can discuss the overall draft projects? Would that be?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay. So are we recommending a motion or an action for the 20% motion of it, or do we want to kick it back to the ad hoc to fight it out and then bring it back to us?
Yeah, I think we would probably want to vote as an ATC to assign that task to the ad hoc
Okay.
subcommittee. We do not have additional ATC meetings scheduled. We could. But we could also provide guidance to the ad hoc subcommittee and ask them to continue that work.
Okay. So what I would like to do is if someone could entertain a motion to then have the ad hoc subcommittee review the 20% reallocation to other zones for priority projects for priority funding, and then make recommendations back to this body.
I'd like to make a motion to have the ad hoc committee look at the 20% allocation and make recommendations back to this committee. And I would also ask for a special meeting to exercise that request.
Second.
Okay, so we've got Ken Field was first, second was Sleepy Hollow. Can I have a vote, please?
Okay, and starting with Bolinas Fire District for Bolinas Fire District, Steve Marcotte. Steve, are you there online with us, sir? We'll come back to him. For the city of Mill Valley, Tom Welch, looks like he might have stepped away for just a moment. For the city of San Rafael, Quinn Gardner.
Yes.
For Marin County Fire, Jordan Reeser. Jordan, are you there, sir? We'll come back to him. For Inverness, Jim Fox.
I guess.
For Kentfield, Larry Passero.
Yes.
For Marinwood, it does not look like Luke was able to join us this afternoon. For Muir Beach, David Taylor.
Aye.
For Novato Fire District, Lynn Osgood.
Yes.
For Sleepy Hollow Fire District, John Hanley.
Aye.
For the Southern Marin Fire, Fred Hilliard.
Yes.
For Stinson Beach, Daniel Blair.
Yes.
For the town of Corte Madera, Todd Lando.
Aye.
For the town of Fairfax, Lauren Umbertus.
Aye.
For the town of Ross, Bob Bastianon.
Aye.
For the town of San Anselmo, Sean Condry.
Yes.
And it looks like Tom has joined us back for City of Mill Valley, Tom Welch.
Yeah.
And then for Bolinas Fire District, Steve Marcotte.
Yes.
And it looks like we also needed a vote from Jordan Reeser for Marin County Fire.
Yes.
And last but not least, certainly for City of Larkspur, Ruben Martin.
Oh, yes.
It looks like a unanimous vote of all in attendance, sir.
Thank you. Motion passes. Good luck. Trying to fight it out. So we'll go ahead and tackle the second discussion, our second half of the discussion, which is to review and or look at a high level the projects that were proposed and submitted for the 23-24 fiscal year. With that, I'd like to go open it up for any comments, questions from the group here.
And from staff, if we're scheduling an additional ATC meeting, we don't necessarily need to take a motion on the work plan today.
Okay. So does that mean we don't have to discuss it?
I think it would be helpful to discuss it. as much
Okay,
now as-
all right.
Yeah.
So we can discuss it at a high level, discuss what we can today, and then discuss the rest of it when we meet again for a special meeting. With that, I'd like to open it up to members of the ATC to see if you have any comments or questions regarding the proposed work plan.
Just a question. The $200,000 for the coastal compliance process, is that a staff thing or is that a consultant?
That's a consultant cost, really. We would likely be taking on a process under the VTP, California Vegetation Treatment Program EIR. So probably a project-specific analysis and addendum under that process. This would be our fourth, and so we've got a pretty good idea of what's involved and what the costs would be for that process. The coordination with the Coastal Commission is a bit of a question mark. They're low on staff. They've lost staff recently, and so it takes quite a bit of time and coordination to go through this process. It would also involve the county planning staff to make sure that everything that we're doing is consistent with the local coastal program as well as the state. So there's quite a bit of coordination involved.
And forgive my ignorance, is it evergreened once it's done, or is it an ongoing need?
Once the CEQA piece, so there are two pieces of the puzzle, several pieces of the puzzle. There's a CEQA piece. Once that CEQA is in place, you're still committed to doing ongoing surveys and monitoring and data collection as you implement. So there's an ongoing commitment once that's in place. We're seeing that in the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Field Break, and we will in Novato as well. It's extensive. Under the Coastal Act compliance, we're working, what was funded previously was getting a public works plan in place that involves coordination with the county as well as with the state coastal commission. That's an ongoing process that's underway now. We're hoping to have something in place by the end of this calendar year. And we'll see how that goes. And then once that is in place, you need to submit what's called a NOID, a notice of impending development for each of the subsequent projects under that kind of umbrella streamlining process. So there's additional permits needed under the Coastal Act.
So how much is ongoing cost to maintain that going to be?
In terms of, when you're out planning vegetation management, it involves bringing out a biologist to conduct biological resources surveys. Botanical surveys are U.S. Fish and Wildlife Protocol level. So you're going out 3 times in the springtime to review potential plants during all of their potential flowering periods, etc. So you're getting a flavor of what's required. Moving on.
I only bring it up because if the lift is substantial as you're describing, that might help guide the priorities of that 20% to get it in underneath the permit if you're going to have ongoing costs. Just a thought.
Yeah, great questions.
A question just came up on a sidebar of if we can just briefly maybe talk and just briefly describe how the ad hoc committee looked at these projects and then brought them forward to us. Do you think that would be beneficial? Or that way it maybe helps us understand how these projects were put in there?
We had an opportunity to look over the projects, discuss the relative merits. I mean, ultimately, I don't think we made any significant changes at the committee, but we did agree in principle on each of these proposals. And had opportunities, I think, at that level to really dive into some of the changes that had already been made. I mentioned before, for example, the grant program, some of the new position funding. So well, ultimately out of that, we didn't make any recommendations for significant changes to the proposals as they were.
Okay, and then when you looked at them, you verified that they met the intent of the JPA and the measure?
There was discussion about, how some of those projects and some of the proposals met the intent of the JPA. So in general, I don't know that there was an absolute consensus at that level, but we did discuss it.
Any comments regarding the projects and everything being brought forward? I have a question. Reviewing the budget, I'm as a department head, I'm very mindful of trying to allocate correct funding based on the measure. And I just kind of want a couple things jump out to me, and part of it is the park ranger side of it and partnering with law enforcement to utilize Measure C funding for that, and wondering if that's an appropriate use of Measure C funding. And not sure if anyone has a comment on that one. I know part of it is the San Rafael Port of it, and another part of it is the Novato Park Ranger.
Yeah, I'm happy to address it from our end. I think it's a critical component of risk reduction and ignition reduction. And we meet with our rangers regularly and had a kind of pre-season check-in recently. And we also use the rangers to clear work sites to make sure they're safe. And so, right, granted, different jurisdictions in different areas and different landowners have different challenges with people illegally using the space. And I do want to point out, it's certainly not just folks experiencing homelessness. We are addressing people recreating in ways that could better be served maybe in a bar or restaurants that are happening in open space. So whether they're deciding to have illegal barbecues or drink, and then, you know, other reckless behaviors associated with that. So our rangers are actively working on they will take ignition sources on site, which is huge for us, as well as then posting like illegal campsites and things like that. They're also coordinating with other landowners. So if things are happening on land that we don't have jurisdiction on, they will still document it, report it. If there is immediate risk, figure out the best way to handle that. So it's hard. And I know Mark said this in other meetings, right? We're kind of in the business of proving a negative, which is certainly challenging, right? Like, how do we prove we're having less fires? But we do have substantial documentation around how many interactions they're having in that regard, and in those patrols. And they are also patrolling and responding to, like for us, the Elks Lodge is a prime example of private property that is being inappropriately used by folks. And so we're able to go and help keep those sites clear. So it's a multitude of projects, and we use them to help patrol our fire roads, report down trees, report any other issues that are going to impact suppression efforts down the road. So it is multifaceted, and for us, it's a worthwhile investment of our local funds. And I do believe it's totally aligned with the measure. We understand it's a uniquer issue in certain jurisdictions, which is why I think local funding is an appropriate place to fund it. But I think it fully meets, in my opinion, the intent. I don't know if Lynn...
Also, I'd just like to say, Novato Fire, based on the fires we had last year, we had about 9 to 10 fires within homeless encampments that were adjacent to neighborhoods. And so the combination of having a ranger who can establish a relationship with the in-house and these encampments that we have, establish relationships, identify potential fire hazards, and being able to mitigate those, and work with Novato Fire, as you know, because we can go out there, help clean up sites, provide, you know, chip areas, and it's in some ways we're trying to create fire adaptive communities out in these areas. Basically, we have everything from solar systems being created in these areas, wood burning stoves, what have you. So if we have someone out there to actually walk these areas and educate as well, it does fall under fire prevention and mitigation.
John Hanley, again, when you mention the homeless, and God bless, but when this was sold to the public, that wasn't part of the scenario. That should be a budgeted item from the city of Novato. If that's a Novato entity problem, then that should be budgeted through the budgeting process of the city of Novato, not from this, in my own opinion, not from this entity. I understand about fires and all, and in the homeless encampments, I get it. But it's a budgeted item from when this was sold to the voters, that wasn't part of it. So I think we can keep expanding where we're going to, get where we're going to be giving out sandwiches. I mean, there's a point where you got to say, what was sold to the voters and what did the voters approve?
I'd like to comment on that because I actually completely disagree with that statement. San Anselmo has a lot of open space. And over the past few years, we put in some new trails. Before some of those trails went in, we had actually, I think, at least 2 homeless encampment fires that were due to stoves or propane and things like that. And a few years ago, we passed a law that allows us to immediately take away any kind of ignition source. And I would say, just hearing this makes me want to have a ranger, because right now the ranger is me and my crew when we have time to walk, and I walk the paths a lot, but we don't really have the bandwidth. And I've actually been to a few encampments, taken away ignition sources. So I think if you are trying, to me, that's exactly what this money is for, because you're taking away an ignition source in the middle of, open space. And I've done it a number of times. And so I think if you have eyes and ears out there and it's somebody who's basically acting as an inspector for fire, I don't see why it isn't. This is something that should be done and needs to be done. I actually like the idea for San Anselmo, if I could get a part-time person to walk all of our open space. Anyway,
I agree with you, but it wasn't sold to the voter that.
Oh, come on.
So if I may address that, being part of the development of the JPA language, being part of the development of the campaign, I actually completely disagree with you. It was part of the campaign that the monies could be spent on efforts to improve law enforcement's ability to prevent fires from happening in the open spaces. That was actually part of the campaign, and then the language was written in such a way that it could be included. That being said, I have asked for Santa Fe to provide data to continue to defend those positions, because they are, let's be honest, that is a concern of people, of taxpayer organizations, of saying, is that money being appropriately used? We could say, I feel personally, Mark Brown's perspective feels that is a good use. However, we need the data behind it. We need to see the number of ignitions before, the number of contacts they have made with people, any mitigations they have, and be able to track that. Then we have a much better chance of defending that position when people are questioning it.
And just to, kind of bring up some of the discussion that we had at the ad hoc committee and that we've had offline individually, I think it's important to keep in mind how important the flexibility of the local dollars are in this program. I think this discussion would be radically different if we were talking about maybe a 20%, application for a position like this. But it's valuable that the agencies have some flexibility with the local dollars. To me, the more important questions probably center around, would these positions be funded if the MWPA didn't exist at all? Were they funded before the MWPA existed? Those questions are the ones, we don't want to supplant. In fact, we're required not to supplant existing funding. There are some important questions to be had here, but ultimately, I think, the concept in general, as long as it's coming from local funding and we're following up and documenting and making sure we learn from, the data we can collect to see that these positions like this are effective. I think it's potentially a good concept. I think there's also room for discussion, and probably at the ad hoc level or maybe outside of this table, for us to really look at whether that type of activity, ignition prevention, direct ignition prevention, is really a mitigation activity, or does it fall, is it law enforcement somewhat different than what the intent of the JPA was? Not to say that we don't have the authority to create some type of positions that overlap with law enforcement. We're doing code enforcement work through the defensible space programs, but I think there are still some valid questions for us to have about this, some discussion to have about these types of positions. I don't necessarily want to see this grow into a big substantial portion of what the MWPA does. But that may just be my opinion on, what the most valuable mitigation activities are. Anyhow,
can
I'll
I
get
just
off my soapbox?
Just one other statement. My experience has been as cities under their own expense disperse camps, we find those folks moving further and further and further out into the wildland urban interface. It will become our problem soon for consideration.
I just, when you talk about it, Todd, to me, like, isn't the bottom line intent of this to prevent fire? And just one ignition source can create a fire, as I've seen multiple times in San Anselmo. So, and it's also in the middle of nowhere, like there's no eyes or ears out there unless we're paying attention. And like our new trails actually have gotten rid of a lot of the homeless encampments. Actually, I recommend everybody put in more trails, because then there's fewer homeless encampments that you can, deal with when you see them.
Yeah, I don't argue with that in general. I mean, we want to prevent ignitions, but the purpose of the MWPA, I think there's still a valid discussion for us to have about what mitigation activities are. There are a lot of things we're going to do related to wildfires in the future that really are the purview of this JPA. Our budget is paltry compared to what we're spending on suppression, which still has prevention activities that aren't funded directly by MWPA. So there are a lot of other funding sources, and frankly, our law enforcement agencies, our partners like the County Parks and Open Space, MMWD, that have a big role in wildfire mitigation, but are not part of this organization, still need to be contributing and participating in the prevention, mitigation, ignition prevention activities on their property. We have a big job to do, and we can't afford to fund everything related to wildfire ignition prevention and mitigation in this county. This is a drop in the bucket compared to what we need to spend. So
Yeah, I think the local piece, Todd, I agree with you. Like I said, and I think just from what was sold to voters and what was approved, I think it's also really important, at least from San Rafael's perspective, that the Rangers were part of our 38-point wildfire action plan, which was adopted even before the MWPA. And that was through our city council. So, we have the support of our city council in terms of the impact of Rangers on helping to mitigate as part of an overall adaptation strategy. So I think that is really important. And I do think the idea of trails is actually something we're exploring more and more, and working with recreation in terms of those co-benefits, right? How can we split costs by creating more opportunities to access open space and all those things? And I would add, Chief Welch, to your point as well, that when our Rangers do identify spots, especially spots that are repeat sites, we'll actually use mitigation money and go clear those areas. And we've actually then gotten feedback from the Rangers that say that area looks great and no one is there anymore, right? And that's what we're ultimately moving towards from a fire prevention standpoint. Of course, there's a lot of other human-centered, focused, housing first things happening that isn't being funded, right, with MWPA dollars. But like anything, I think as public servants, right, there's tons of overlays and there's tons of opportunity to force multiply. And I do think using local funds to fund this where it makes sense for those agencies is again a valid use, but it is going back to the way the JPA was designed, which was to allow some flexibility at the local level. And I think in our case, it makes sense for us.
Just like to add, I think there's a perception, right? So it's like with our vegetation defensible space inspectors that are going out there and doing defensible space inspections on properties, we still run into the enforcement problems. And for us, it's administrative citation. It's like, how that works, right? It takes forever. And sometimes by the time you get to the point where it's like, okay, we're going to do the work for you and then bill you for it, they're like, oh yeah, we had to change of heart. We're going to do this, but you put all these hours into doing something like that. Well, we're ultimately just trying to prevent the fire from starting in the first place, right? So I think the perception out there is, are we funding police? Like, are we just funding patrol officers? Is that what this funding is? I think that's kind of the perception. But the reality is that if it's a funded ranger position, that ranger is ultimately, that's all they're doing. Or if it's a joint funded position, whatever percentage of funding that they're getting from MWPA to do their job, I don't see how it's different than what we're doing as far as inspectors are concerned. And they carry a much higher level of enforcement than we do. So they don't have to go down that route. They see something, they can immediately sequester it, take it, change it, and then we can come back in and do the work behind it. But again, I think it's a little bit of a public perception, especially with the defunding law enforcement and all that kind of stuff.
I think too, the neighborhoods in Novato that have experienced ongoing fires basically in their backyards really support having the Rangers, and they've really pushed Novato Fire and pushed the city council to do something. So this is an avenue for that.
Bill, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, it's different. It's not on the subject, but it has to do with the work of the ad hoc committee. And I thought the comment made about West Marin, about the hardship that this 20%, the burden that they have as a result of it, I think that should be given a high priority, and thinking about how to avoid hardship for them as we go into the 20%. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Any other comments from the group? Seeing none, are there any members of the public that would like to comment on the work plan or the discussion we've had?
If there are any members of the public wishing to comment on the work plan or the current discussion, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute yourself. And so there are no hands for comment.
Thank you, Martina. We'll go ahead and bring it back to the group. Very good discussion. I think it was very robust. I think a lot of things for us to consider. I think, as Fred mentioned, it is public perception and sometimes perception of a lot of fire agencies as well. However, I think, Quinn, you were able to articulate the benefits of it. And I think there's some, for a lot of us is being able to understand what those benefits are, because there's different risks within each community. And we've got to try to reduce those risks however we can. With that, and for our action item on this, do we need to take a vote to move this to the ops committee, or does this stay within the ad hoc committee continuing with that 20%?
I think the latter. I wouldn't, since we are going to be scheduling another ATC meeting, I would I wouldn't vote to pass on to the ops committee yet. Sounds like you guys still feel you have more work to do.
Okay. What I like to do then at that point is request a motion to table the discussion of the 23-24 work plan until we have an opportunity to meet again at a special meeting.
And there's a doodle poll in your inboxes right now.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion to the group to table this item for future consideration based on the findings of our ad hoc group.
Second.
Nice. First, Ken Field with Mr. Pissarro, second with Mr. Hanley from Sleepy Hollow. May I get a vote, please?
Certainly, sir. Starting with Bolinas Fire District, Steve Mercott.
Aye.
For the city of Mill Valley, Tom Welsh.
Aye.
For the city of San Rafael, Quinn Gardner.
Aye.
For Marin County Fire, Jordan Reeser.
Yes.
For Inverness, Jim Fox. We can come back to him. For Kentfield Fire, Larry Pissarro.
Aye.
For Marinwood, it does not appear that Luke Fretwell was able to join this meeting. For Muir Beach, David Taylor. Come back. For Novato Fire District, Lynn Osgood.
Yes.
For Sleepy Hollow Fire, for the Sleepy Hollow Fire District, John Hanley.
Aye.
For Southern Marin Fire, Fred Hilliard.
Yes.
For Stinson Beach, Daniel Blair.
Yes.
For the town of Corte Madera, Todd Lando.
Aye.
For the town of Fairfax, Lauren Umbertis.
Yes.
For the town of Ross, Rob Bastianon.
Yes.
For the town of San Anselmo, Sean Condry.
Yes.
And for the city of Larkspur, Chief Martin.
Yes.
And it looks like, were we able to get Jim from Inverness? Okay, so it looks like he's no longer in the meeting. And then David Taylor is also not here. So it does look like we have unanimous vote of all who are currently in attendance.
Thank you, Martina. Motion passes. With that, it takes us to item number 8. Do we have any requests for future agenda items? Anything else that we'd like to discuss at our future meeting? Seeing none, we'll go ahead to item number 9, which takes us to adjournment. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you at the special meeting.
Hey, just a quick note of appreciation for you guys. And the 80%, 20% was a new concept that was proposed to us without any definition. And we've been creating the definition as we go. So I really appreciate your patience and the work that you put in the conversation and helping us define that 80-20.
Thanks, Mark. And then thank you to staff for everything you guys do to support us.